So I'm John Scott here on allmemphismusic.com with my partner,
David Fleischman.
How you doing, Flash?
I'm fantastic today, and it's going to get even better.
So we are here on allmemphismusic.com, and we are so honored to be with a man that has changed, that helped change the musical landscape of the United States, of course, and change the musical landscape of the world. And we're so proud to have with us today Mr. Jim Stewart. Jim, thank you so much.
Delighted to take the interview, and of course I'm just a small cog in the wheel.
Yeah, you're a small cog, Jim. So Jim, why don't we start off by telling us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and when you first knew you were going to get into music.
Well, I grew up in a small town about 70 miles east of Memphis called Middleton, Tennessee, and I was a big country music fan. Of course, when I grew up, all it was radio, and I got my musical education from the Grand Ole Opry.
Really?
And so I started, my dad bought me a guitar. I learned a few chords on that, and later he bought me a fiddle, and I think my mother regretted that.
Why a fiddle?
The fiddle, I don't know. But that's the worst sound in the world, to hear a beginner on a fiddle. So I had to sit out on the front porch and the swing and play my fiddle and the guitar.
And you eventually got a band where you were playing with, right?
Yeah. We had a little band that we played mostly for just our own enjoyment. And, there's not many places to play. So that's how it all started. But on Saturday night, I had my ear tuned to Grand Ole Opry.
Somebody told us that your band actually had some opening acts, or an opening act we might have heard of before. Was it Elvis?
No, it wasn't Elvis. At that point in time, of course, this was before Elvis.
Oh, I see, okay.
But when I graduated from high school, I moved to Memphis.
Why did you move to Memphis?
I didn't like farming. I didn't like following that mule down the cotton row when it's 110 degrees. So when I graduated, I caught the afternoon train to Memphis instead of the night train.
Couldn't wait to get on it.
Right. Couldn't wait to get on. And when I got here, I stayed with my sister, not the one I was in business with, my younger. She's the younger sister. Mm-hmm. And her husband, until I got it, I think our first job was Sears Rowboat.
Wow.
Everybody, sometime back then worked at Sears for a while.
Crosstown.
Yeah, Sears Crosstown. And I made contact with some local musicians. Don't remember just how it started.
Right.
But somewhere in there, I met a guy named Fred Byler, who was a singer and played the bass, upright bass. So we formed a little band and started playing square dances.
What was the name of the band?
I don't even remember.
Didn't matter at that time.
Didn't
You were
matter.
just playing.
I was playing. That's all that mattered, yeah. And of course, I did this until 1951 when I was drafted. So I spent 2 years in the Army.
Was that during the Korean War, or was that
During
after?
the Korean War, yeah, Korean War. Fortunately, I never went overseas. But and when I went into the service, I was stationed down in Fort Benning, and of course I met some musicians there, and I played clubs on the weekend.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the VFW club, and also in Phoenix City, Alabama, which is just across the river from Columbus. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty rough. Columbus was known for its, they had some shady characters.
Fighting going on there.
Yeah, in that area. So anyway, we played the VFW clubs and wherever we could, And so I was making pretty good money and drawing $90 a month as a PFC.
Wow. So you were playing country music?
Yeah, country music, oh yeah. And so anyway, I spent 2 years in the service, and I got out in 1953, came back to Memphis, and immediately began connecting with musicians, and Fred Bowler was actually was a classmate with my wife. But that's how I met him. And Fred had a pretty good voice, and they played bass, upright bass. So we formed a little group, and we played, all the local joints. I remember one night we played a gig in Paducah, Kentucky, and we walked in. They had chicken wire, and I'm sure Flash can relate to this.
One time I had that happen down in Jackson, but everybody I think is familiar with that from the Blues Brothers movie.
Yeah,
because they had that scene with the chicken wire.
But this was for real,
right?
And so they had chicken wire and across the band, to protect the band. Well, this worked fine until some guy came in one night with a .38 and a couple of shots in the ceiling, and we decided to move out. We decided to move on from
Discretion was the better part of valor, right? I understand.
Yeah.
So this was in Memphis?
No, that was in Paducah.
Paducah, okay,
Kentucky.
I'm sorry.
This was just prior to my being drafted, so
I see.
I had my draft notice and all, and I had to report in February, I think, of '51. So I spent 2 years in the military and got back, and I went to work for First National Bank. Wow. It's different, First Tennessee now, I think.
Right. Well, so you came back from the service, working in the bank. You were still, you knew how to play.
Oh, yeah.
Because you had been playing.
Yeah.
But were you still playing gigs and things like that, or basically just
Yeah, we were
banking
playing
business?
gigs, and I went to Memphis State, now University of Memphis. I graduated there with a business degree, and I played weekends in a band, and as a matter of fact, we played a club called Clearpool.
Oh, yeah.
It had been changed to the Eagle's Nest. It was originally Clearpool, and then it was called the Eagle's Nest. And we had a pretty good sized band. We had three. This was kind of a country rock band. We had steel guitar. We had 3 fiddles, but we had a trumpet as well. And
that was kind of different. Those
yeah. Mm-hmm. So this was just the beginning rock and roll era. So we played I think it was Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Well, they had an act that came on when we'd take an intermission. A young artist by the name of Elvis Presley.
Ah, okay. That was the opening act.
That was
not even an opening act. He played the breaks, right?
He played the breaks. So when we'd take a break, Elvis, and of course, Scotty Moore and Bill Black, they would come on and play. And we noticed that when they started playing, the dance floor just everybody hit the dance floor. When we were playing, not everybody was dancing, But we didn't, nobody thought anything about it, and so I met Bill and Scotty. Elvis was he was shy. He really was. He didn't come over and join the band when we all sit down. Scotty and Bill would, and Elvis was kind of off in the background, but It wasn't a question. It was just shyness. He really was.
You hear that a lot about comedians, how they're so extroverted on stage, but off stage they're very introverted.
Yeah, he
in the
is.
same way, he was so
He was
magnetic live performing, but
He
off the
was.
stage he was a very quiet, shy
He
guy.
was very shy and very quiet. And I remember a little story. This was very early. They were playing the Louisiana Hayride in Shreveport on Saturday nights. They would go down there. And I remember Scotty and Bill, one night we were sitting there talking, and they said, "Man, I don't know if we got enough gas money to get to Louisiana Hayride this weekend." Yeah, that was the early days of Elvis.
What year was approximately was that, Jim? That you guys were Elvis was opening for your band.
Yeah,
But what year was that? Do you think?
that had to be somewhere 55.
54,
Somewhere
55,
55, 56.
So you're working in the bank at this
I'm
point,
working
still
the bank, I'm
playing
going to
gigs.
school.
And at what point did you get into the studio business?
It was probably sometime in 57. Fred Byler and I were, after we quit playing the Eagles Nest, we formed a little band and played square dances. It was kind of a novelty thing back then. Fred knew this guy that did the booking and called the square dances, so we had a band and we played the square dances, mostly on Friday night, Saturday night, and of course by this time Sun Records had really blossomed. Elvis had become a national hit by then on a couple of records. So Fred and I got it. Well, hey, why can't we start a record company? If Sam can do it,
Exactly.
why can't we do it? And so I had a barber that had a little record label, and he had a portable recorder, mono. So what we did, my wife's uncle had a double garage, so we converted that into a makeshift studio, and we didn't have any equipment, so we had to borrow my barber's equipment, and we recorded a record on Fred, and it was a song that I'd written, which was the only one, because after I wrote it, I said, "That's it. I'm not a writer." So we recorded the song, and we took it down to Sun, made a demo, took it down to Sun, and of course it was awful, and so we were disappointed, but not discouraged. It's okay. Well, we'll just form a label, and put it out ourselves, So we did, and it was a song that I'd written, a country song, and so we did that, and made the rounds to the radio stations and the record shops, whatever. And it was awful. It was a horrible record.
Was that Satellite?
Satellite.
That was Satellite.
That was Satellite. That was the first right. record on Satellite Records.
Were you still on the same equipment you had, or did you upgrade?
We didn't have any equipment.
You didn't have any equipment.
It belonged to
the barber.
The barber, my barber.
So how did you
Ellis?
How did you go about getting the equipment that?
Well, Fred was working, and I was working, and so we bought a portable tape recorder and a couple of microphones, you know, and set up shop, as I say, in my wife's uncle's garage, double garage, and we did a couple of things there. I remember one, we recorded a record on an artist by the name of Don Willis, and it was called Boppin' High School Baby.
Look out.
Look out.
Boppin' High School Baby.
And you know that record is a collector's item in Europe today. You can't even find it.
Is that right?
I do believe that.
It really is. I didn't know it until a few years ago. I mean, we probably pressed maybe 500 in all, you know.
There's a whole market for records like that, you know, from the really old days that people just they probably have value because of their age and the originality and all of that.
Yeah.
Well, so it was on satellite, and did you have so you released your record? Were there other artists that came out on satellite?
Yeah. We had. Let's see, Donna Ray Jackson, and I think she was a co-host with George Klein at one time.
Oh, okay. GK.
TK, yeah, on his show. No, we had several.
Was the Veltones? We looked up. We saw doing a little research for this.
That was beginning. Okay, so what we did, we decided we'd need a larger place than the little double garage. And at that time, my sister got interested. She's always been into music. She worked at Union Planters Bank, and I worked at First National. So she wanted to get in the record business. Well, Fred got discouraged, and decided he didn't want to pursue it any further. And he was a DJ also. He was when KWAM was in West Memphis. I don't know if you remember that or not.
No. Yeah, I'm very well aware of that. In fact, the KWAM story is a story that needs to be told because there's a lot of people that got their start.
That's right.
I mean, a lot of people got their start.
Especially your blues artists.
Right. Wolf and Muddy. And
all of them, yeah.
And I think even, and not a blues artist, I think Johnny Cash came through there very early on.
Yeah. And we, as a matter of fact, we had a radio show on it. I was working with the band. This was after I got out of service. We did a radio show, and so one thing led to another. And we decided, we put out 2 or 3 records. Well, Fred got disinterested. He wanted to move on with his disc jockey, career, right. And I believe he moved to Little Rock. Well, that's when my sister Estelle. She'd always been very active and in music. She was a pretty good piano player, and she loved the record. Of course, her son Charles or Packy was in a band called the Marquis, and when they were graduated from high school, or when they were still in high school, along with Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn and Wayne Jackson, I believe, was...
Terry Johnson, I think, was the drummer.
Terry Johnson was the drummer. And anyway, I think...
Smoochie or somebody on piano. I forget who the keyboard player was.
Smoochie Smith was the keyboard player, but I don't know if I think he came in later. I don't think he was actually an original member. But anyway, they had a little band called the Marquis, Steve and Duck and Packy, as he was known, right. Charles Axon. So Estelle, my sister, was always, she was interested in getting into business, and certainly because her son was, a musician, she wanted to help his career. Mm-hmm. So when Fred just kind of vanished, there was also another guy originally with us, Neil Herbert. He played guitar. He was from up around Brownsville, I think. I met him. So, and at that time, and a young lady by the name of Nadine Easton, a blind piano player. And the reason I say that because our publishing company was called East Publications.
Right. As soon as you said that name, I thought about that. That's
Yeah,
where it came from.
yeah.
I'll be.
Wow.
And she was just a delightful person and had such a positive outlook, on life. I don't, if I were blind, I don't know how I could have the kind of outlook that she had. Just so, East Publications was named after her. But anyway, Fred left town, and we bought Neil Herbert's interest, I think, for $300. That was a lot of money.
I was going to say,
Especially
A, it was a
from
lot of money, but B, that was a very wise investment.
But anyway, Estelle and I formed this, became Satellite Records. She borrowed money from Union Planters where she worked, and we bought an MPEX recorder. I mean, this was professional, and $1,300, I think.
Now, that was really big money.
That was
That's
uptown.
big money.
Uptown, man.
She borrowed $10,000 on her house, and so we had to find a place to put it. So we decided. I had another friend that had a vacant building out in Brunswick, Tennessee, which is 15, 20 miles east of here. So we went out there and set up studio, a makeshift studio, but at least we had a good tape recorder.
And you were still satellite at the time,
Still
correct?
satellite.
Okay.
Yep.
You know where I'm heading. Eventually we're going to get to how and why we
right.
changed the STAX. But go ahead.
Yeah, that was still satellite. I always hated the name. It was there because of the Sputniks, and we just.
Right. Yeah, nobody knew what a satellite was
That's
until
right.
the Sputnik.
Yeah, right. So anyway, we kicked around out there, made a couple of records, and nothing happened. And we decided, it wasn't working. It was too inconvenient, number one, because it was like 20 or 30 miles out of town, and we all worked and day jobs, so it was very difficult to go that far.
Yeah, those days that was a nice little trip, actually.
Yeah, it was. It really was. So we decided to look for a place in town, and my first thought, I don't know why, but we got to have a high ceiling. That was my number one.
Right.
That was my number one. When you look at it, it really is not that important. But I mean, to me, that was my thing. Got to have a high ceiling, because we'd been in that little garage, and the sound was awful. So we were looking around. I looked at a lot of the neighborhood theaters had gone out of business. So we looked around. I looked at one on Hollywood, Chelsea and Hollywood. It was called the Hollywood Theater. I don't know if you remember.
I actually remember that.
Yeah. And then, now I don't know, Chips Moman, of course, and I we got together during that period.
Right.
And Chips says he found the one on the building on the Capitol Theater on Maxwell. He's probably right. I don't know. I'm not going to one way or the other. It doesn't matter. But he claims that he found it. He found that building. So we leased the building. It was huge. It was a huge theater, and you walk in there and you talk in a normal tone, and the echoed, it just off the wall. Yeah. So what we did, we partitioned it down the middle. We built some acoustical sound barriers down the middle of the theater to kind of make it a little less live. hung a lot of curtains and stuff and padding on the wall. It was still live. I mean, it was like a,
It had a great sound. That room did.
But it was, for a studio, it would be considered, live, too live, really. But we made some baffles and things and burlap on the walls, and, it helped.
One thing you didn't do, you didn't level the floor. It was a theater, so it sloped down.
The floor. You walk in and you walk down. That's right. And of course, we used the stage was large, and we used the stage for the control room. And ironically, or whatever you want to call it, the theater speaker, what they call the voice of the theater speaker, was still there. It was huge. It stood about 9 foot tall and about 10 feet wide. And the control room wasn't much bigger than it. It took up most of the control room that we built, okay? And so that was our playback system. And we built a little window where we could see out in the studio. We did all this on our own. We didn't have money to hire somebody. It was certainly amateur, makeshift, whatever. We didn't know what we were doing.
Did you hang some curtains from the walls?
We hung curtains. Well, we built the acoustical tile wall up about 10, 12 feet. But the ceiling was more like 20 feet high. So we hung drapes from the top of the ceiling down to the baffles that we built. And then we put some burlap padding on the sidewall, and we didn't have an echo chamber, but we had one hell of a bathroom. And it was about 15 by 20, all tile, and man, that was some echo chamber.
So, Jim, you have the studio, you're building the studio, and when did it hit you that this was the place? This was. Did you know it then that this was it?
Really, we didn't think of it at the time. It was just a necessary move, and we, when you got novice like myself coming in and putting a studio together, I mean, you don't have any blueprints, and we couldn't afford to hire architects. So it was just a makeshift. I think this will work. Maybe that'll work. And of course we had a problem. There's no air conditioning in it.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
No air conditioning, no heat, except we had a small heater that we ran the gas line to, and it was nowhere near adequate to heat the whole studio. Nowhere near. It was right. We built a drum stand, and like I say, we made some screens, some baffles, and that we could kind of get some isolation, and we built a drum stand, and it was right next to the heater, and when it was cold outside, it was just as cold inside. So we would make we make a couple of takes on a record, and everybody'd come down and stand around the heater.
Now, what year was this?
This was 1960.
All right, so
we moved in late '59, and we made our first record in early part of 1960, and it was a group called the Veltones, a vocal group.
Where'd you find the Veltones?
They came. What's the Field of Dreams? Build it, and they will come. That was really it.
Wow.
We built a studio, and word in the neighborhood spread that, hey, somebody's building a recording studio. So they would just walk in. And so anyway, our first record was on this vocal group, the Belltones. So what I did, I took it to DIA, which I don't know if I told you. I had played on WDIA. It was years earlier when I got out of the service. I was in a band. WDIA played country music.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
We had a noon show on WDIA, a country band.
Wow.
This was in 1958, 59, somewhere along in there, right? So anyway, by 1960, it had gone to R&B, R&B, and there was a DJ known as Rufus Thomas. So we made the record on the Belltones called "Fool in Love," and now I'm still working the bank, so I have to do this on Saturdays and a holiday, whatever. So I take the record in. And when I say take it in, I walk right into the control room. Rufus was on the air. And I handed him this record. I introduced myself, and I handed him the record. And he put it on the turntable.
Wow.
And then the Belltones. Well, in the process, Rufus and I got to know each other. I didn't know he was an artist at the time. Of course, he had recorded for Sun earlier in his career. So Rufus and I became good friends, and I found out he's an artist, and so, okay, let's make a record. So I signed Rufus, and in the summer of 1960, early spring or summer, the Belltone Records, never made it. They were a good group, a very, very, very good harmony, whatever. But anyway, Rufus and I became good friends, and he was free from the Sun contract, so we made a record on Rufus, and it was entitled "Cause I Love You," and he brought in his teenage daughter, Carla. She was 16 at the time. And she's on the record with him. And so we released the record, and it started to create some attention locally. We started getting, I forgot to say, my sister set up a record shop in the lobby of the theater so we could pay the overhead. There you go. So anyway, people started coming in and was asking about this record on Rufus Thomas. Well, that was, I just couldn't believe this. I mean, we're in the record business.
You had like a regional hit with that?
Yeah, it became a regional hit to the point that Atlantic Records got word through the local distributor here, Music Sales. A local record distributor there on Union, called the attention to Atlantic Records, and that we got a local record that's starting to make some noise, and so I get a call from Marty Simon one day that he was sales at the distributor. He said, "There's a gentleman here from Atlantic Records out of New York would like to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." So he said, "I'll send him over." Well, he was a local rep. I mean, he was from out of New York, but this was his territory. And name was Norman Rubin. And he came over to the shop, and he said, "You'll be getting a call from a gentleman named Jerry Wexler from Atlantic Records, and see they might be interested in picking this up for national distribution. Fine. So I'm back at the bank Monday or Tuesday morning. I get a long distance call, and he introduced himself as Jerry Wexler, and they said, well, we're interested in distributing this Rufus and Carla record nationally. So I said, well, okay. As a result, we made a deal. We made a deal for the record. Well, we did pretty good on the record. It may have sold, I guess, nationally, maybe 50,000. I don't know.
That was pretty good back in those days. That was a nice size record.
It broke in a few markets, but never really caught on. It was mainly a southern hit. Birmingham, Atlanta, and south. So that was good. Hey, we made a few dollars on the record.
Was that deal you signed with Atlantic, was that for that one record, or was that eventually the deal where they distributed all of your music?
Well, no, it was on this artist. It was I think a 5-year whatever.
From the artist.
On the artist, see, and of course I thought the artist was Rufus Thomas, but Carla's name happened to be on the record. So here comes the kicker. Rufus brought Carla in one day and said, "She's got this song. I'd like to hear you. Like you to hear." Carla sat down at the piano, and it was like yesterday. And she started off a song called "Gee Whiz." Look in his eyes, and I said, "My God, this is it. This is it." I mean,
nothing's greater in this business when you hear something and you
know.
When
she said, "Gee whiz, look at his eyes," it was all over.
We had chill bumps all over your body.
I had chill bumps, I really did. And so that led to, obviously, our first national hit record, "Gee Whiz," which we recorded, I think it was late October, whatever. And we put it on the Satellite label, okay? Now, Rufus was, when I signed the deal with Atlantic, that was, Rufus, I thought was Rufus Thomas. He'd be under a 1 year or the 5-year option, whatever. Well, when I released Gee Whiz on the Satellite label, that record took off like unbelievable. I'd sent some to St. Louis and just, here and there. And all of a sudden we get calls. We got calls. Of course, it just busted wide open locally. I mean, we couldn't keep enough records and just bam, And
you love when that happens.
And then what happened? I get a call one day at the bank from Mr. Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records. He said, "This record by Carla Thomas, Gee Whiz, I understand it's on the Satellite label." I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's my record." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, she's under contract to Atlantic." Well, anyway, the story was her name was on the record, Rufus and Carla. But she didn't get any royalties out of it. She wasn't an artist. She was just a backup singer.
So their position was, since her name was on that record, they had her as an artist.
And she wasn't even signed as an artist at the time. I didn't have the money to go into legal, whatever. So okay, look, just, yeah. And of course, being new in the business and you got a potential hit record, you're excited and business is secondary, I guess.
Sure.
I just wasn't thinking. And I should have been, because I was going to law school at night.
Let me ask you this. You're working in the bank.
Right.
In the banking business, kind of a straight-laced business.
Bean counter.
right?
Yeah.
A bean counter, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden you're getting calls from New York and this place. What were your fellow employees? What were they thinking? Were they going, did they react to it?
You mean the bank?
The bank people that you work, your coworkers.
It was strange, kind of a strange situation, because, of course, when jumping ahead, Gee Whiz became a smash. I'd get calls, long distance calls, from Wexler or somebody every day at the bank. And they began to wonder, I guess, what in the hell's going on here? We're getting these calls from New York, and I'm just a peon there working at the bank. And, but anyway, instead of getting in a lawsuit, which I couldn't afford anyway, we probably could have won it. I don't know. But anyway, we said, okay, leave it on Atlantic. Well, of course, Gee Whiz went on to be top, I don't know if it made number one, but it went very close.
It was certainly top 5.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, of course, she was on the Dick Clark show shortly thereafter, and, a big record. So, right at a million records. But anyway, that was the beginning. And then, of course, behind that, then we began to sign, people were walking in the door every day wanting to, to sign with the label. Every local act, R&B act in town, which was great. So Rufus, of course, I give him credit really for laying the foundation and being the what I would call the spark that ignited the satellite label at the time. Carla's second record, Love My Own, which did pretty well, but nothing like Gee Whiz. And I thought I was going to be real smart on the second record. I wanted a different sound, so I said, "Oh, the Nashville sound was all the go." During that time, I said, "I'm a big." I know it all now. I'm going to take her to Nashville, and I'm going to second record, and we're going to have a smash. Oh boy, that was a big mistake. I spent a lot of money. I think I had the Anita Kerr singers on the background. And then the record barely made the top 100. But anyway, that's just
that's life in the record business.
Yeah, that's right. So I learned then we had something here. There's no point in me going to Nashville.
So, Jim, you were still working at the bank.
Yeah, I'm still at the bank.
And then, so I'm guessing you got off work at the bank and went right to the studio, or did you stop somewhere else?
I stopped on every day. I would work till 5 o'clock and go down one block to the Crystal, get my burgers and my pie, and head to the studio.
There you go.
There you go.
So how long did you stay at the bank? I mean, did you?
I didn't leave the bank until 1965.
Is that right? Wow.
We had all kinds of hits. I don't know. I just, of course, Steve Cropper took over. Well, backtrack here. Chips was, working the studio during that early period.
Like an engineer?
Yeah,
sort
he
of
was
that
an
role?
engineer, and would listen to anybody that came in. Well, of course, my sister had a son that, was in the music business too. She was a musician, and she wanted him to, take a major part or more or less run the studio. So there was some conflict there between my sister and Chips. So finally I just, to keep peace in the family, so to speak, I told Chips, I just have to pay him some money and, he could go on and do, his own thing.
And he went on to have great success in America.
Yes, he did. Chip's mama was a hell of a producer, is a hell of a producer and writer. And
guitar player.
Yeah,
he's a heck of a guitar player.
Yes, sir. Yes, he is.
So, Jim, what was a typical night like at STAX Records when you got off from the bank and would go to the studio? What was a typical night?
Typical night. It was a party, and I don't mean that. It was a party because everybody involved. This was something new. You know, it was a new experience for everybody. It was exciting. We had a couple of hit records, and it was just a group of enthusiastic, excited people, and just couldn't wait to get in the studio.
So was that when the Marquis came into the picture?
Yeah, they came in. My sister naturally wanted to record on the Marquis, and they had the instrumental thing that they had worked up called Last Night.
Well, had you made the name change of the label at this point?
No.
You're still Satellite.
It's still Satellite.
And then you were in a predominantly African American neighborhood, and you ran across this group of white kids through your sister. That's how they came into the fold.
Most of them were classmates.
Right. They all went to Messick High School,
Steve
I think.
Cropper, yeah, all of them. They went to Messick. Steve and all of them, I think.
Right.
Most of them
Packy,
did.
Terry Johnson.
Smoochy Smith wasn't. He was he was the keyboard player, but I don't think Smoochy was a graduate from Messick. But anyway, most of them were from Messick. So anyway, like I say, my sister wanted Charles, her son, to pretty much run the studio, but he had a problem. He wasn't too reliable, and you know, he was a heck of a nice kid, but he just, you know, he didn't have that drive or whatever, and so instead I asked Steve Cropper to run the studio during the day, and when Chips left, and so anyway, getting back to the. I finally, in 1965, I decided it was time to leave the bank. It was costing me more money. I was making maybe $300 a month at the bank.
And you're on the phone all the time.
And I was on the phone, and my boss didn't really understand why I was on that damn phone so much, you know, talking to New York. So anyway, I decided to move on, and I think they thought I was probably embezzling money because by that time I was wearing nice clothes, which most of those people couldn't afford, and I was driving a Cadillac. They look at me a little strange, and I think they were checking the money box to see if anything missing.
And now you're leaving.
Now I'm leaving, right? But anyway, I finally gave up the day job and started working 24/7.
Well, at what point did you change the name from Satellite to Stax, and why did you change?
Last Night was an instrumental that the Marquis came out with in 1961. I think it was the early spring or summer of 1961. Satellite had not gotten known nationally because Carla was on Atlantic, and so was Rufus at the time. Label. So Satellite had not reached, you know, national recognition. The name Satellite Records. When we released the instrumental on the Marquis Last Night, it became an instant hit. In the meantime, I had made it. I told Jerry Wexler, I want label identity. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I had a little power, you know.
You figured that one out.
Yeah, because of the Gee Whiz and Rufus and then the Marquis. So it became the label was pretty much known nationally by that time. Well, I get a call one day from an attorney out of California, and they said, we own the rights to the name Satellite Records. I didn't know. I think they'd had a hit on some group. I had seen it, I think. But anyway, I never liked the name. I never really liked it. It was just something that, it was convenient. when Fred and I named it, I'd always wanted, to change the name or get another label name. And this attorney said, we'll be happy to negotiate, and blah, blah, blah. I said, no thanks, but thanks, So we dropped the name Satellite Records immediately, just like that. So what are we going to call it? And I was sitting around the table one night with Evelyn, my wife, and I said, well, it's very simple. You call it STAX. S-T-A-X. Stewart Axton. I mean, bingo.
And you got that immediately, I'm sure.
Stacks of wax.
Right. So my wife named the company.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
so did the marquees now switch
we
from
switched
Satellite to
the
Stax?
next release, everything else, that was the last satellite release on the marquee.
And that was in 61.
That was in 61. Yep.
And you were still independently distributed?
We were distributed by Atlantic.
Oh, okay. You signed.
We had made a deal with Atlantic, and after last night became a big record, then we negotiated a 5-year deal with Atlantic for distribution, because we still didn't have the personnel, the promotion and distribution network. Because I had just, I had been spending all my time at the bank, and then when I was in the studio, it was in the control room, because I did all the engineering for years.
So basically, here you are with a studio. You got STAX Records name, and you're basically in an African American community, and that was unheard of, I think, at that time, probably, right?
Yeah, really was.
It was unprecedented.
Yeah.
So how did that melting pot all come together?
By accident and the grace of God, I guess. Really, we were in the right place at the right time. So I don't take a lot of credit for being smart enough to know when to move to Macklemore Avenue. But of course, word spreads rapidly, as you know, in this business. And after Rufus's hit and Carla's hit, of course, Rufus is still on the radio every day, and he's out, and so it just got to the point. They just walk in off the street. William Bell walked in.
Just all of them.
All
they
of
all
them.
came in off the street. But they were all, so many were neighborhood kids,
yeah,
right?
they were neighborhood. Booker
right.
T lived around the corner. And
Wow.
of course, he just walked in one day, and we decided to buy a Hammond organ. We didn't have one when we got there. It was just a used piano that I'd picked up somewhere. And so after we had a little money, we upgraded the studio and got a Hammond B3 and some better mics, some Telefunken mics, power mics, because we were using Sony and little cheap mics originally, because that's all we could afford. And originally it was just a portable tape recorder. And we finally had enough money to WW Distributing down on Madison Avenue. I don't think they're around anymore, but
I hadn't thought about them in a long time.
I think his name Leon Sides was a salesperson there. We bought an Ampex, a mono Ampex tape recorder. It's $1,300. Hell, that's a hell of a lot of money.
Well, yeah.
$1,300
Sure was.
for a tape recorder, and 2 or 3 mics. Was I've gotten, but it was still expensive. We had $10,000. She borrowed $10,000 on her home, and we had to make that, build the studio where we could, use it, and whatever basic equipment that we had to have. And I do mean basic, and so she opened. What she did, she opened a record shop in the lobby of the theater. It was a huge lobby, so we had a record shop in front, and it was there for years. And I tell you what, that was probably the best marketing tool that you could have, because when you are dealing face to face with that consumer, and you put a record on that turntable, I don't care if it's got your name and whatever on it. If they don't like it, they ain't gonna buy it.
So, Jim, were you renting the studio at this time, and how much did that cost when you first moved into STAX?
Less than $5,000
a month.
Less than 5,000, probably more like $3,000. We didn't use all the $10,000, to move in. Well, we did most of the work ourselves.
Well, how much rent were you paying?
$300.
$300 a month.
$300 a month. Yeah.
And you had mentioned you got the organ in Booker T. How did that happen? You had 2 African Americans and 2 white guys. How did you get those together, and how did that evolve?
Booker T walked in off the street. He lived just around the corner. He walked in off the street. David Porter worked at the Big Star, I think it's Big Star,
right, yeah,
grocery across the street. And he knew Isaac Hayes. So and then of course Rufus knew a lot of people. And it just, over a period of time, word of mouth, that we were in the neighborhood, that we were there. Because we certainly didn't have to go out looking for talent. They found us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like today where, there's sort of a record company on every corner. In those days, there weren't that many.
No.
And so when you had one like you guys that were getting some recognition,
Yeah,
it would be the place that people would know to go to that had that desire.
Word spreads rapidly.
Right.
And, of course, Sam was kind of in a different field.
Sam Phillips.
Yeah.
Right, over at Sam.
He was more into the rock, and, so any of your black artists are going to somehow more than likely find us. And, of course, with Rufus being on the radio,
Right.
There's no secrets in this business. And
The B-side of a bad single is the only secret.
yeah, you're right. We've had plenty of those. Yeah, and of course, radio was different then. WLOK was a small, or R&B programming station. They competed with WDIA locally. Of course, DIA was all over the South, where they were 50,000 watts. Mm-hmm. So we had some pretty good advertisement out there with Rufus Thomas on the radio, and Carlo being a hit, and him making hit records. And like I say, it doesn't take long for the word to get around that, hey, they're making this kind of record over there on Macklemore Avenue.